Hey everyone, welcome back and thank you for being here. So, camera shut down again earlier. I lost about a page and a half of what we were reading before I noticed at that time. The other times I really didn't lose more than a few sentences for whatever reason. Um, it is Wednesday night, the third night of my reservation, and we're going to leave Saturday morning. So we've got tonight and 2 more days to finish up Cordova. Um, I want to drive over to Taos and do a big loop around the mountains over to Eagle Nest, go up top, come back down to Arroyo Seco and uh, Rio del Norte, Rio Grande del Norte National Monument or something, I think is what it's called. Um, so we only have, I guess, 11 pages left in this part of Cordova, so this will be a relatively short podcast series, only 3 episodes. But that's okay. Um, a lot of the series is only 2 or 3 episodes, and that's totally fine as long as it stays organized. Um, so we are on page. No, stop. When the recording stopped working last time, I think we were still in. They have a different idea about that, and I'm pretty sure it was on page 72, Windows. Um, and so we're going to start with "It is not necessary," which is the second to last paragraph at on 72, and it's also the second full paragraph that starts on 72. It is not necessary for the Native American to identify himself as human. One need not trouble oneself with stating the obvious. It is necessary to identify himself as a class or phylum. I am a member of this family, this clan, this group, this place. The identifiers serve as notice to the alien other of difference and as an informal request for recognition as other. A person of the West need simply state a personal name. In doing so, he makes an appeal to some understood but unstated sense of commonality. He expects also, although this too is unstated, to not have to deal with differences. That's why the matrix can go assumed and unnoticed. The Native American gives notice of not only who he is, but where he is, quote, coming from. And there's parentheses. I once read a text written for medical personnel preparing to work on the Navajo reservation. The text had a section on what to expect on meeting the first Navajo patient. He will begin by telling you where he lives, what his clan is, and who his family is. Only then will he tell you his name, if at all. Without this stated perspective, the Native American feels there would be no way for the speaker to know why he says what he says. Meaning for the Native American is embedded in context, is in fact given meaning through context. I sat on the committee overseeing the thesis of a Native American master's student. She had prefaced her research with a chapter, quote, about herself, as the non-Native Americans on her committee described it. I, too, had faced such criticism as a graduate student. I tried to tell the student what it was that the rest of the committee members objected to in such an approach. She didn't hear me. What sense could anyone make of what my research is about if they don't know who I am? How could they understand why I did this specific research in this specific way? Since we were not in a Native American school, and certainly not in a Native American world, I finally managed to convince her that her preliminary chapter, which we both understood as essential, could be an addendum to her research chapters. If you want the master's degree, I said, this is the only way that you can receive this degree. The final presentation of her thesis, with addendum, felt as wrong to her as her inclusion of the who I am did to her non-Native American committee members. So the compromise felt wrong to both sides similarly. Compromise. She did receive the master's degree. In the philosophical investigations, Ludwig Wittgenstein addresses his questions about the possibility of different conceptual schemes in the following. If anyone believes that certain concepts are absolutely the correct ones, and that having different ones would mean not realizing something that we realize, then let him imagine certain very general facts of nature to be different from what we are used to, and the formation of concepts different from the usual ones will become intelligible to him. Compare a concept with a style of painting. For is even our style of painting arbitrary? Can we choose one at pleasure? The Egyptian, for instance. Is it a mere question of pleasing and ugly? Wittgenstein stresses that it is not the, quote, very general facts of nature that guide us, but rather our specific concepts of those facts of nature. If we are to understand peoples of a cultural perspective different from our own, we must first be aware that we too are driven by a perspective. Cultures differ from one another because they derive or are based on different understandings of the nature of the world. In the case of the, quote, Egyptian style of painting, the conceptual framework for the depiction of the world precedes the mechanics of painting. And, quote, Oriental painting is not a matter of choice but a way of seeing the world, just as is a Western way of seeing or painting, quote unquote, Western. The, quote, style is not visible to the artist as he creates his work. It is the picture through which he views the world. Westerners, taking themselves as the standard for measurement, are not aware that they too have a style that is unique unto themselves. All non-Westerners, however, can readily pick out a, quote, Western style of painting, or thinking, or seeing and interpreting. From within one's own conceptual framework, the framework that is shared with the rest of the members of one's culture, it is possible to ignore the framework as long as one communicates only with one's fellows. This is usually the case with Westerners. Their communication takes place within a closed circle. Everything that exists outside that circle of reference is seen as other, quote unquote, and is subject to understanding only after extensive interpretation. The interpretive network, however, is of their own making, or it would make no sense to them, so that the interpretations lead less to knowledge of the other as other than to an extension of one's own way of seeing. The new is made familiar. From a Euro-American perspective, the works of the Native American, before being put through the filtering process of interpretation, appear cryptic. There is much that is unsaid. From within the Native American circle of communication, there is much that need not be said, but is rather understood. It is not necessary for the Native American to say to his fellows, before each utterance, let us assume that the world is dynamic, in infinite motion, and I can only make a statement through one of, perhaps, infinite perspectives. It is, likewise, not necessary for the Euro-American to say to his fellow, let us assume that we are speaking for all humans when we talk about human nature, that we believe that there is one all-encompassing truth to which we all direct our research, that we are a superior species among inferiors, or that a semi-omniscient, objective perspective is possible. Our conceptual framework is a sort of shorthand that is assumed. It is what gives substance and meaning to our utterances. It is why it is so easy to communicate with those like ourselves. Is it necessary to carry about a tract outlining the metaphysics of a particular group in order to quote, understand what they are saying? Perhaps not, but it is certainly necessary in the name of good scholarship to have done some comparison of cultural explanations for some of the very general facts of nature. To assume that one's own conceptual framework or explanations are the only possible answers to the questions posed is precisely what the term ethnocentricity covers. A dialogue with an alien other requires, first of all, an acceptance that there is the possibility of an other as other, and not simply as a distortion of oneself. In the second place, one must be willing to accept the other as equal. That is, both parties have something to say and can provide their own explanations for their end of the dialogue. There lies still another problem in cross-cultural communication. The writer must grapple with the problem of determining which of the possible audiences one is writing for. A Native American must choose his voice, quote unquote. Will it be a Native American audience or a Euro-American? The Euro-American seldom has to consider this dilemma when setting down his thoughts. Beyond the fact that he might consider whether he is speaking to a generalist audience or one of specialists, he need not consider a cross-cultural or perspectival approach. This is still part 2, and that we just finished chapter 5. And we're starting chapter 6, and there's only chapter 7 after that. 10 minutes in. I guess the dead cat is doing pretty well. I think this, like, distance is also a lot better than what I've been, I don't know, maybe. I wish you could see the mounds. I feel like the GoPro just doesn't get the mountains properly. But it's a really wide open space in all directions right now. It's lovely. And yeah, there's red rock sedimentation, like a burnt. Somebody told me they saw a pink rattlesnake in, I guess, the Grand Canyon, I think. And he said it was more like the red rock than it was pink. But Language's Window, Chapter 6 of Part 2, page 76. An exploration into a culture with which we are unfamiliar exposes us to more than new ideas and practices. We must encounter the language of that culture. In the case of North American indigenous peoples, we find that most of them, I don't know if it's charging. Sorry. Yeah, it is. Okay. An exploration into a culture with which we are unfamiliar exposes us to more than new ideas and practices. We must encounter the language of that culture. In the case of North American indigenous peoples, we find that most of them speak English fluently, and that some of them no longer speak their own native tongues fluently or at all. Nevertheless, the languages embody concepts that have survived the loss of a native language. Language is a window that frames a particular view of the world. Even when the window disappears, the view that it framed remains. Benjamin Whorf, a linguist working in the mid-20th century, explored the particularity, the incommensurability of languages, specifically through an analysis of Native American languages. Hold on, sorry. This wind is terrible. I don't know, I may have skipped a couple of pages when we started out based on what was dropped, but I'm not going to worry about it. You guys just Benjamin Whorf, a linguist working in the mid-20th century, explored the particularity, the incommensurability of languages, specifically through an analysis of Native American languages. His work has been subject to much debate, nevertheless he has contributed to the awareness that other cultures, other languages may not contain the same concepts. My own experience confirms this. In a conversation with a Shoshone speaker, I asked how the term God was translated, since, from my own experience, there were no linguistic equivalents in North American indigenous languages. She said that they did not interpret the term, they simply used the known term, God. In a similar fashion, the term that they used in her language to indicate the Shoshone idea of the sacred or divine was not translated into English. God and the terms used to designate. This wind is terrible, guys. I mean, I love the wind, but still. God and the terms used to designate the source or force of all things are non equivalent. They are two different and incommensurable terms. It may not be necessary to become fluent in a culture's language in order to understand the language structure, but it is necessary to have some knowledge of that structure. Even as a language conveys information through its structure, however, Worf also realizes that language is based on some conceptual notions that are an integral part of a cultural group. He emphasizes that the languages of the Indo-European family, which are most of the European languages, can be as different as Norwegian and Italian. Nevertheless, they share some common concepts. Worf sorry. Worf does not research the concepts themselves, but is aware that these may be the source of differentiation. Quote, this is a long block quote from Worf. Actually, thinking is most mysterious, and by far the greatest light upon it that we have is thrown by the study of language. This study shows that the forms of a person's thoughts are controlled by inexorable laws of pattern of which he is unconscious. These patterns are the unperceived, intricate systematizations of his own language, shown readily enough by a candid comparison and contrast with other languages, especially those of a different language family. His thinking itself is in a language, in English and Sanskrit and Chinese, and every language is a vast pattern system, different from others, in which are culturally ordained the forms and categories by which the personality not only communicates, but also analyzes nature, notices or neglects types of relationship and phenomena, channels his reasoning, and builds the house of his consciousness. And that's from Benjamin Worf's book, Language, Thought, and Reality. Of the quote this is back to Cordova, of the quote vast pattern system that underlies our spoken language, Worf says in a note to the above passage, quote, much thinking never brings in words at all, but manipulates whole paradigms, word clauses, and such grammatical orders behind or above the focus of personal consciousness. As an example of this quote pattern system that may lie beneath our conscious awareness, consider the way I thought I heard something. Sorry. Um, yeah, consider the way that we, quote, assume a definition or paradigm of the planet we live on. We need not remind ourselves if we are members of what Worf calls the SAE, Standard Average European Group, that the Earth is an inanimate form of dumb matter. It is simply there, requiring no second thought on our part as we step onto its, quote, surface. We are made aware of the Earth's, quote, animate character only when something unusual occurs, as in, for example, an earthquake. We are accustomed to assuming that we are walking and living on the surface of a ball that is more or less smooth. Consider, however, another paradigm. What if we view the Earth not as a ball in empty space, but like the inside of a raw egg? The Earth is the yolk swimming in the egg white, which we know commonly as the atmosphere, but usually disregard as part of the Earth. In this portrayal or paradigm, we do not so much walk on the surface of the Earth as swim in a narrow area surrounding the skin of the yolk. The Earth, in this sense, is not a simple hard surface that we need not take into consideration when we plan our actions. The Earth becomes a more fragile thing. Its permeability is exposed. Its surface becomes less sure. In this scenario, we are like the creatures that dwell on the ocean floor. Perhaps a fish in water is as unaware of the water as we are of the atmosphere that sustains us. We become aware of the equivalent of the Earth's albumin only when its consistency changes, in a windstorm, for example, or when the air is excessively polluted. The idea of being in something, the Earth as the inside of an egg, would result in a very different set of forms and categories, underlying our languages than if we saw ourselves as existing on the surface of a ball in empty space. The egg analogy would not be so unfamiliar to many of the indigenous peoples of the American Southwest, who envisioned the female Earth as surrounded by a male fertilizing sky. The reality of the Sky Father and Earth Mother in an unavoidable and eternal embrace would then, quote, make sense to those who presently see the analogies as mere fragments of the imaginations. The philosopher Spinoza likened our existence to that of a cell in the bloodstream. The lone cell would be unaware of the fact that it is merely a part of a greater whole. The people with the imagery of the Sky Father, Earth Mother, whole, would be individual blood cells participating in a dance of existence and non-existence, with one exception. They would be aware that this was the fact of their existence, a quote, knowing blood cell, so to speak. The work of Benjamin Whorf alerts us to the possibility of different ways of interpreting the world. Stuart Chase, in the foreword to Whorf's Language, Thought, and Reality, says that Whorf presents us with two major ideas. First, that all higher levels of thinking are dependent on language. Second, that the structure of the language one habitually uses influences the manner in which one understands his environment. The picture of the universe shifts from tongue to tongue. Whorf, in presenting the idea of linguistic relativity and thereby bringing up the possibility of cultural relativity, flatly challenges the Western belief that all languages refer to the same thing. Whorf's challenge consists of this statement, quote, a change in language can transform our appreciation of the cosmos. Chase explains the opposing view. Quote, the Greeks, sorry, I don't know who Chase is, and I don't know if she explained, if she's introduced somebody named Chase. Stuart Chase. There we go. The second sentence, in the foreword to Whorf's Language. So that was the long quote we just read. First, that all higher levels of thinking are dependent on language. Second, the structure of the language one habitually uses influences the manner in which one understands his environment. Picture of the universe shifts from tongue to tongue. That was Stuart Chase. Okay. Chase explains the opposing view. The Greeks took it for granted that back of language was a universal, uncontaminated essence of reason, shared by all men, at least by all thinkers. Words, they believed, were but the medium in which this deeper effulgence found expression. It followed that a line of thought expressed in any language could be translated without loss of meaning into any other language. Obviously not. But not all American indigenous peoples are fluent in their native language. This has been the result, first, of an attempt to eradicate primitive thinking, and secondly, an attempt to eliminate, quote, the Indian through total assimilation. When indigenous children were taken away from their homes to boarding schools, they were forcibly placed with children of another tribe so that they could not communicate in any language other than English. They were also provided with a new worldview through the ministrations of the missionaries who were often in charge of the schools. Nevertheless, a view of the world that was, quote, Indian managed to survive all attempts to eradicate the paradigm. The reason that this was so is that behind language there is a, quote, pattern system of forms and categories that could be taught without full knowledge of the language. The, quote, pattern consisted of more than words and speech. It included also a way of being in the world. This latter is taught through attitudes, through practices, through teaching relationships between people and between people and the earth. By the time the educators and missionaries abducted the child at about the age of 5 or 6, such attitudes and relationships had already been established. The family, regardless of the educators, could reinforce such a pattern in the home and in the community. There was, in other words, beyond language, a context to being, quote, Indian that eluded the attempts at eradication. The philosophical questions. Chapter 7 of Part 2, the last chapter in this series. How have a people managed to maintain a worldview unlike that of those who now dominate their world? That there is such a worldview may be denied by some, but no Native American would accept this denial. The Native American differs from the Euro-American not simply because he may have a different physical appearance, but because he interprets the world in a manner that is not consistent with the interpretation of the Euro-American. Whether the Euro-American wishes to admit this or not, the paradigms, model, or worldview offered by Christianity is the implicit model of the universe underlying the quote modern, read Euro-American, explanation of the world and of man that is offered up in the schools. A Native American child does not encounter merely a new set of facts that he must accommodate into his lexicon of knowledge when he enters the school system. He also encounters a new set of expectations with which he is unfamiliar and for which there are no explanations. The organization of the schoolroom is, to begin with, very alien. Unlike his home, the organization is one of extreme regimentation. Children sit in rows of seats that all face in one direction, toward the teacher. The teacher alone has a right to speak. She or he is the sole authority in the classroom. The student must not leave his assigned place without permission, and only the teacher grants permission. The Euro-American classroom is an exercise in authoritarianism. I found this was true with how I was expected in some cases to lead a classroom by my administrators, and yeah. And I think this can go for college classes too. And so if you're a good professor but you don't buy into anyway. The process of being and learning in a Native American environment is very different. What do you see, buddy? First of all, children are not subjected to regimentation, and adults do not represent authority that exists beyond question. What is taught at home is mutual respect. No adult has sole authority over a child, and no child has authority over any adult. All human beings are equal, including children. Children, however, quote, never having been here before, are accorded a certain attention that is viewed as the responsibility of all adults. The child is understood to be in need of being shown how to act or be in this world. There is an assumption here that is missing in Euro-American circles, that the child must be socialized into a particular pattern of behavior that is understood to be specific to the group of which he is a member. The pattern consists of showing what is involved in living within a community of others. Paramount in this involvement is how one's actions affect the others. The child is taught to be acutely aware of his own actions as well as the actions of others and the consequences of those actions. The idea of the other and of the community far exceeds what is seen as common in the idea of a typical Euro-American nuclear family. The Native American family is the entire group. The community includes not only the family, but the surrounding environment. One learns to be aware not only of one's actions and their consequences toward other people, but toward the ground one inhabits. There is an assumption about what it is to be human that underlies all of this training of how to be human. The what is the second question, and the how is the third. Second question being part 4, third question being the final part 5. How to be human. The assumption is that humans are not fully human when they come into this world. Rather, they have the capacity to become a human being. A child has all of the faculties required to adapt to the group and to the environment in which they reside. He is keyed in to being a group being, rather than an isolated individual. He is programmed to learn a language, which allows communication between members of the group, and he is naturally curious about the world around him. The child is not viewed as something that must be allowed, given the freedom to learn, primarily through experience. With the assistance of the entire group, the child learns to become a human being according to how the group defines a human being. There is another assumption related to this view, that each group is assumed to be different to varying degrees from one's own and will have a different definition of how one conducts oneself as a human being. Human, in other words, is defined by specific groups in specific ways. The flexibility of a child's nature allows that he may be shown how to be an Apache, a Sioux, or an Englishman. For this reason, the first years of a Native American child are the most important years. In these few years, the child is given a worldview, without books, without authoritarian means, and this is the child that is turned over to the official educational authorities of an alien society. What may seem to be a digression into child raising is very important here, because it shows how it is that a worldview is inculcated, despite attempts to eradicate the Native American way of being in the world. By the time the child reaches the age when he must enter the, quote, American school system, he already has a worldview. He knows his physical surroundings and what group he belongs to. He has learned to expect certain actions from others. He has also acquired a methodology of learning. The Native American child, when he enters the American formal system of teaching children, confronts not only a group of strangers, but a system of being that is totally unlike his own. It may be argued that all children encounter an alien environment when they leave home to go to school. The Native American child, however, enters what could be described as a parallel universe. The trees, the mountains, the air, the physical place may be the same. The physical space is not. An example might shed some light on this claim. My daughter and a non-Native American school friend both gave birth to their first child in the early fall. On a sunny spring day, the two young women came together to give their infants their first outing. My daughter's friend has the back seat of their car loaded with the paraphernalia she thinks necessary for the outing. My daughter has only her son. At a nearby park, my daughter places her son on a grassy area and he begins to crawl and inspect the strange territory. The friend, on the other hand, leaves her son in a car seat while she spreads out a blanket for the child and then proceeds to dump onto the blanket an assortment of familiar toys. Once the child is on the blanket, he is admonished about touching the ground. The grass is yucky, he will get dirty, and the mother distracts the infant from exploring by handing him various toys. Occasionally, the mother takes the infant's hands and walks him about on the blanket. My daughter follows her infant as he crawls on the ground, introduces him to trees, flowers, clouds, the wind on his face. The non-Native American mother introduces her child into a potentially hazardous and alien environment. She offers him safe, quote-unquote, alternatives through the presence of the blanket and the toys. Everything else is, quote-unquote, dirty. My grandson, on the other hand, is encouraged to touch, taste, and explore a new and delightful place. The non-Native American infant is taught to confront his environment. Our child is shown what the world contains. This is the stuff of which a worldview is built. Without language, without explanation, each of the young women is saying to their infant, "This is where you live." Each child is introduced into the, quote, real world. One carries with him a man-made environment that proclaims safety amid a potentially hostile earth. The other into a strange but interesting place that he is expected to know intimately. Ludwig Wittgenstein, in his work On Certainty, that's the name of the book, explores the means by which we come to have a foundational knowledge of the world we take for granted. But I did not get my picture of the world by satisfying myself of its correctness, nor do I have it because I am satisfied of its correctness. No, it is the inherited background against which I distinguish between true and false. The experience of the world that my daughter and her friend introduced to their sons is a means of providing a world picture that will constitute the, quote, inherited background that grants reality to all subsequent experiences of and in the world. The existence of these two unalike world pictures is the basis upon which I make my claim that the Native American child confronts not only new physical surroundings when he enters the formal school system, but a different philosophical space. The confrontation of the two systems, or games, as Wittgenstein would have it, leads to philosophical questions that even our children must entertain. Those questions are: 1. What is the world? Part 3. 2. What is it to be human in that world? Part 4 of the book. And question 3, what is the role of a human in that world? Part 5. So what is the world? Metaphysical questions. And there's still some metaphysics in what is it to be human in that world. But once we understand that, then we understand ethics and politics. We've already done a lot of epistemology and language and perception and just, yeah. That's the end of part 2. Hope you guys enjoyed it. The sun is still setting, so I can go ahead and read the beginning of part 3 just to to preface us. I'll read it again when we start the next one. Part 3, what is the world? How did the world come to be the way it is? Do the stories we tell about the origin of the world make any difference to who we are and how we live? What is the relation of human beings to the rest of creation? What is the world made of? Matter or energy, stones or songs or spirit, the breath of the wind, beauty, harmony, or some relation among these? Does time flow like a river, spiral like a whirlwind, float like ice on a pond? And what difference does that make? What is real after all? Are there many realities or one? So, yeah, I think this will just be a short episode. We're not going to break apart the series. Um, so, all right, you guys. Like I mentioned before, I don't want to be out here when it's like fully set because it gets really cold. Kind of want to be like in my tent and I've got things set up to go to bed and stuff. So, um, thanks for being here. Hope you had fun. See you guys.